Good evening, everybody. Welcome along to another Blether. You'll notice two things. One, I'm on my own at the moment, and two, we're early. So all that Russell has told you about us being late being my fault, there's proof there that it's absolutely not. He is unfortunately he's not too well today, so we've given him a leave of absence for tonight just to recover. We've got a big week ahead, so we need a fighting fit Russell for our Highland Whisky Academy next week. So he's recuperating for the weekend. So you've got myself tonight. So I'm just going to say a few hellos to the guys online. Ian and Dave, again, sorry to break up your chat there with our own. Great to see you on YouTube. Alistair, great to have you along on the old Facebook channel there. Ian's got the nickname in the glass with a Brewdog LA out, so he's having a wee half and half there. And Dave's got the Murray McDavid, the craft port cask finish, which I've heard is a pretty sensational dram as well. Good evening to Juliet. Hello from Denmark. Brilliant stuff. Are you over at a festival? There is a festival. I know that Callum Fraser from Glenfarclas was posting about being in Denmark this week as well. So it must be the place to be. Let us know what you're doing over in Denmark, Juliet. That'd be fantastic and great to have you along. We're visiting Glen Allachie again next week as part of our Highland Academy. So it'll be great if you're there. But if not, we will certainly drink to you and raise a dram. Our guest tonight was Scott Adamson returning for a sequel. We are bringing him back in. So we'll get the chance to catch up with Scott and all the goings on up north certainly from where we are at Tomatin. I myself, I'm on the good old, it's not prematured whiskey, unfortunately. It is the H2O. We've got a wee one due next week, so I'm on the potential taxi hospital run. So unfortunately, I need to be behaving for the next few days or up to a week. So yeah, let's not listen to me babble on myself. And we'll get Scott involved. There we go. Good evening, Scott.
Evening, Mike. How we doing?
I'm all right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's that lovely bit of the live stream where we pretend that we've not been chatting before we came on.
Yes. It's like 5 minutes beforehand. It's like, oh, good evening. How are you?
Yeah, it's like all those TV shows where they show up at someone's door and they've conveniently got a microphone on and things, right?
Yeah. I'd say we always laugh at what was it when we watch Just Have Tea, Come Dine With Me. And they're always in the order that you need them to arrive in, and it's it's so fake, but it's cheesy and it's fun, so it's all good.
It's almost one of the best parts of it now.
yeah. Me and Russell were joking before we go on is we need some kind of jingle or some kind of theme tune. So Kat we're talking about her on Monday about it, I think. So she's got the perfect jingle that she's going to be coming home and making up. So we'll have a theme tune when Kat's back.
The cheesier the better, Kat. The cheesier.
I think she was just going to do it herself. She was just going to like a do or something like that.
Production value. That's what we're here for. Production value.
Oh yeah, exactly. A few guys jumping on. We've got Stuart Dick. He was a guest of ours not that long ago from Mossburn. Chris Willis.
He was a guest of ours for a few years. Stuart worked at Tomatin for a few years there. So yeah, good to see you, Stuart.
Yeah. Got the bug up with you guys, didn't he?
Yeah. It happened.
That's not the same bug as Russell's got today, but it completely different.
I certainly hope not. I mean, it could be.
Chris is on the Cu Bocan 15-year-old. And a Tomatin PX. Is that a distillery PX you've got there, Chris? That's he's going double barreled.
Quite right.
Absolutely. Alistair's another one with the Cu Bocan 15-year-old. I was we got it back in last week,
I
and
saw that.
yeah, I was so I'm gutted that I'm driving, or potentially driving, because that was going to be my bottle for tonight. I was going to crack that. It's such a good whiskey.
Oh, it's amazing. So happy with that one.
Yeah.
Just it's some of the earliest stock of Cu Bocan, and
Mhm.
it's not often you get to see lightly peated whiskey in sherry casks for the full maturation. So, and then at 50% as well, it's a bit dirty, it's a bit earthy, but it's got all that nice sweet smoke in there as well. I absolutely love that whiskey.
Yeah, and Cu Bocan itself has been doing really well, isn't it? So we're on the 4 creations.
Yeah, so I'm
You
actually
said that.
drinking the very last of my bottle of Creation 1 right now. But yeah, Creation 5 is about to come out towards the end of this month. So
All right.
yeah,
Nice.
exciting times there as well.
Are
Exciting.
you allowed to give away the cast makeup of that yet, or?
Not quite yet, not quite
Okay.
yet, but it's well worth waiting for. But by the end of the month, there'll be some nice news to share. And again, as with everything with Cu Bocan, it's going to be something a little bit unusual, something that you've maybe not come across too often before. So that's
Awesome.
always nice. Yeah.
It seems to be a regular occurrence with Cu Bocan, though, isn't it? It's casks that are slightly different. You had the Moroccan Cabernet,
Yeah.
the Japanese Sochu, and these kind of guys are popping up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the joy with Cu Bocan is we've got this wonderful spirit, which is this lightly peated, so it's got that touch of smoke, but it's still quite fruity. It's still quite sweet. If anyone's been to Tomatin Distillery, you know you're not ever going to find a heavily peated whiskey coming off of those stills. But then we get to be quite almost experimental, actually experimental with the casks. There's not too much you can really do with whiskey that is radically new. That's why the SWA exists. But within that, there's little bits and pieces you can do. And for us, it's either working with a cask that we've never used before, or perhaps taking casks that we have used before and mixing them in a way that we've not done before. So, I mean, before Tomatin was a big single malt brand, we've been blending whiskey for 125 years. So that kind of history of understanding flavor really lends itself to Cu Bocan. And yeah, just every time a whiskey comes out, it's exciting, it's new, it's flavor forward. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and are you going to be reusing some of these casks, refilling them, and seeing what happens further
Yeah,
down
there'll
the
be a
barrel?
bit of that. There'll be a bit of that. So, for example, the casks that are about to come out with Creation 5, the whiskey was actually only in these casks for about a year and a half towards the end as a finish. And I know for a lot of distilleries, that's quite a long finish. But for us, you know, we often talk about 6-7 year finishes, you know. But these casks added so much flavor in such a short period of time. And we can refill them, and they've still got so much life to give. So we're going to be doing that quite a lot as well. But what we'll typically do there is for the second fill, it will be filled with new make spirit. So a lot of the time, the first fill is a finish, and then the second fill will be with new make. So you've got a longer period to take that in.
And that just kind of takes out that intensity that's maybe in the cast, doesn't it? And allows that kind of slow burn, longer term maturation.
Yeah, and the great thing with the first product as well is by doing that finish, you know, I think this kind of narrative's died down a little bit, but certainly for a couple of years there was this notion that finishing was bad, and it was like putting lipstick on a pig, and that's distillers were using it to hide bad spirit. For us, that's never been the case. For us, the spirit that we produce, be it Tomatin or Cu Bocan, is light and it is fruity. And if you were to fully mature it take a PX cask, for example, if you fully mature those spirits in a PX cask, you lose a lot of the distillery character. So by starting off in a refill cask, allowing that distillery character to flourish, you can then layer in the flavors from the finishing cask. But then something that throws that on its head is the Cu Bocan 15-year-old, which is 15 years in an Oloroso cask, and that peated spirit just gives it enough grip and earthiness to hold its own within that cask, which has been fascinating to watch. And that's going to be an annual release, the 15-year-old. So every year we'll have a batch coming out towards the end of it each year.
There you go. Well, that's answered Alistair Gray's question there. He's on the Cu Bocan 15, a belter. Hope there's another one later this year. So
Absolutely.
I mean, you have to wait pretty much the whole year for it, Alistair, but it's coming, so don't worry. A couple of other guys on the Cu Bocans, Dave Muirs on the Cu Bocan also. Stuart's got the distillery exclusive bourbon casks.
Yeah, Stuart knows quite how much I love bourbon matured tomatin as well. It's for me, tomatin is at home in a bourbon cask. It just performs so well. It's maybe not the most romantic cask type, and it doesn't grab headlines like some of these sherry casks do, but tomatin in a bourbon cask for 10 to 15 years, you're in a very good place.
That's quite interesting because you don't have a core range fully mature bourbon cask, do you?
No, so I mean, Legacy is 85% bourbon and then 15% virgin oak. So it's a lot of those flavors, but it is a younger spirit, and the virgin oak's adding a little bit more wood than you would maybe get from something like than something like a 15-year-old just in a bourbon cask. Our travel retail range has a 21-year-old fully matured in bourbon, but again, it's a different beast altogether. It's much more cask led. But yeah, no, some of those distillery exclusives or the private casks that we bottle in the teens and bourbon barrels just work really, really well.
Yeah. And we were talking a wee bit about finishing there. It's one thing that's always kind of intrigued me is how long can a finish be? It's never, there's no real, and I remember speaking to Graham Murray when he was at Graham Cool, at Glenmurray a wee while ago. And he kind of said, for his kind of rule of thumb was anything that's less than the original maturation would be classed as a finish, and then otherwise it's a secondary maturation. But again, there's no real...
Yeah, there's no definition, is there? And I think that's where things get a little bit squirrely, because sometimes you'll hear of it's been double matured, but the reality is it's been a 6-month finish, you know? I would agree with Graham. For me, it has to have spent at least half of its life in the second cask before you call it anything other than a finish. But the difficulty there is if you're talking about a 4-year-old whiskey, it only has to be finished for 2 years. If you're talking about a 20-year-old whiskey, it has to be finished for 10 years. So again, it's not, not the same thing every time. But I think most producers right now are quite transparent and quite open. I don't think anyone's really trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. So it's a good time to be a whiskey drinker, really. I don't think there's ever been a better time. If you look at the variety of whiskey on offer right now, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. We just mentioned, I think, was it Ian who's on? No, it's David who's on one of the Murray McDavid, the cask craft range. They've got some really nice, quite young spirits, but Marsala and Port and these kind of guys, and it's a really nice, like you say, variety. You guys have got the Cu Bocan range, giving you a huge variety. Is there any casks that you haven't worked with yet that you would, legal or illegal, that you would like to get your hands on?
There's plenty of illegal casks that I would love. Every day I get lists sent in from cask brokers from around the world, and there's always something in there that I'm like, I almost want to buy it just to do it. So a good example is the Cu Bocan that was in shochu casks.
Yeah.
Up until about the week of release, shochu casks were illegal. We had been maturing the whiskey because we had access to these casks. And of course, we went and designed the packaging. That doesn't take a week. That takes a long period of time. We were going to release this and hope that the laws changed. And it just happened that they did. So you can kind of do whatever you want within the confines of your warehouse. It's just you can't call it Scotch whiskey.
Yeah.
So I'm often looking at these lists thinking, God, I wonder what a mead cask would do, or a maple syrup quarter cask. That seems ridiculous. Unfortunately, it's difficult to justify the budget for that when there's still so many good casks out there that are legal that we've not used yet. Last year, I was visited by the team from Class Azul Tequila, and the almost pessimistically, when the regulations kind of opened up a little bit a couple of years ago, my head went, everyone's going to be using tequila casks and that. And I was never a huge tequila fan, but these guys came over and we had a great time walking around the distillery, and they left me with a bottle of their tequila, and I took it home that night and opened it, and I fell in love with it. I almost had that moment of, this could be a problem, like I did 10 years ago when I tried single malt for the first time. I thought, I'm going to go down a tequila rabbit hole here. So we've been in conversations with those guys because the tequila that they're producing, not for the sake of it being tequila, but because of the quality of the tequila, I would love to see what that can do. But I love Scotch whiskey matured in casks that have held other spirits, because as much as sherry casks and wine casks will add a lot of the flavour from the previous contents, the interaction between spirit and wood is always fascinating. So rum casks give you flavours that are not just rum and are not just American oak. There's some sort of development there. It's the same thing with bourbon. It's the same thing with cognac. So I think tequila, there's interest there. So wait and see.
So I imagine that most tequila will be American oak.
Yeah, a huge amount of it. There's definitely folk out there. There's actually a tequila company. I can never remember the name of them, but it's a Scottish guy that runs it, and he's been maturing tequila in sherry casks and things like that as well. So there is.
Is that Mike Ballantyne?
Could very well be, yeah.
He started with UWA tequila, the UWA tequila,
right?
And he's now got Storywood.
That's exactly what it is. Storywood, yes, yeah.
He's from Inverurie, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Or well, he's from Aberdeen. He came to Inverurie, and he's married to an Inverurie girl now. So
excellent. But it's cool to see that across spirits. We obviously are fascinated by whiskey, but beyond that, it's really cool to see what other spirits are doing. And there's lots of spirits categories that are having that kind of moment that Scotch single malt had about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when experimentation was coming to the fore. And it's good to see that across the board.
Absolutely. I think in Scotland, in the UK maybe, but certainly in Scotland, we have this idea that tequila is just for drinking to get drunk. We've kind of probably been overexposed to poor tequila. And there are some absolutely belting tequilas out there. So it's certainly, and it's massive in America. It's
huge.
It's huge.
I mean,
quite an expensive industry to get into, but
it was only recently I realized you could drink tequila without lime and salt. It's amazing when you go over to America and you see, I think, not only just the scale of it, but the range of people that are drinking tequila. As much as Scotch is diversifying and is doing its every bit to open up to a wider consumer than it has before. You look at something like tequila, and it's appealing to people across the board. It's really amazing to see.
I would love to get some more great tequila, and we've got the UWA, and sporadically we get in the Storywood as well. So I can't remember. El Jimenez, I think, is the one we've got in just now. Willis, who's watching on Facebook, he's just been given his first tequila. Let us know how that's going down. I take it somebody hasn't just handed you a tequila. Go and drink this. Maybe he's just been given his first bottle. I don't know. You have to elaborate a little bit, Willis, on that.
That's almost like
a hard point. So he has.
That's the text message that I send my wife when she asks what time I'll be home from the pub. I've just been given my first tequila.
Add on 3 hours. Yeah.
Go past go.
Yeah, might be heading into the big smoke now. We've got a question coming in, Scott, from Ian Bruce on cask restrictions. I'll pop this up on the screen. Okay. I assume he means cask, not cake, of the cask maturation. Like layering another pine or something else external.
That is a question I've never come across before. And it's honestly one that I do not know the answer to. I mean, I guess technically the whiskey's not coming into contact with anything other than oak. So I don't see how it's any different than putting the cask on a wooden stove or on a metal stove. You're just putting something on top of it that happens to be...
I've seen people wrapping their cask with kind of polythene or tarpaulin or something like that.
Right.
Try and slow down the evaporation. But all you do is kind of suffocate the cask. It doesn't breathe.
Yeah.
So I guess...
Yeah, I mean, this seems like something different that almost like allow the cask to... if you take that concept that where the cask is matured matters because of the environment, and if you're down by the sea, you're going to get more salt, and if you're up in the Highlands, you're not. By that logic, then by putting something like pine around the cask, it could conceivably impact the flavor.
You could almost do it where could you put a oak cask into and build a pine cask or a cherry wood cask around it.
Yeah.
So you're inside. That certainly would be double maturation.
I mean, our cooper would be very unhappy if I showed up at the distillery tomorrow with, can you build a cask that our casks can go in, but this one has to be made of pine? I don't know if I think I'm told where to go pretty early on in the day.
Yeah. That's it's an interesting concept, I guess.
And it's kind of similar to. I guess it's not similar, but it's got. There's a lot going on there, similar to likes of Balvenie and Glenmorangie recently having releases that have had pine smoke or heather smoke in the malting process rather than just peat.
Yeah. Just a wee bit of diversification, I suppose, and try something different. I would hazard a guess that somebody's maybe tried this before.
Just saw an Amazon delivery man at the window there. Yeah,
Oh,
don't know what I'm getting.
Is that a bottle of whiskey?
Probably not. Support local.
Yeah, I've started buying books, and Russell's the same. Get told we're not like buying any more whiskey, so we're buying whiskey books.
Yeah.
So my recent one was the David Stark's Independent Scotch.
I saw that. That looks amazing.
It's an incredible book, really, really good. And one of these, it's easy to read. It's so easy to read. I've read most of it twice, just going back, kind of checking up and stuff, and it's becoming a bit of a Bible on independent bottling.
Yeah.
Which is really fun. It just kind of kickstarted me again into reading whiskey books again. I get in trouble for that as well, because apparently when I'm reading, I'm meant to be doing it as a leisurely thing, but no, she classes it as still working.
Sitting there with a highlighter and with post-it notes.
I'm not quite at that stage yet, but
Oh no, I'm beyond that stage.
Yeah, maybe the third time I read it, I'll get the old notebook out. But yeah, I suppose it's World Book Day today, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So that feels like a day that we should be reading a whiskey book.
Yeah. I don't have it with me. I was going to bring it up and kind of give David a wee plug. It just arrived in the shop today. So we've got that, guys. We don't normally plug our sales on the Blether, but if you want a really good whiskey book, Independent Scotch by David Stark, it's available from the shop. Tomatin hasn't really been a big player in the independent market, certainly in Scotland, has it? We see the odd Gordon MacPhail release, but
yeah, do you know, it's really interesting. I would say when I started at Tomatin about 10 years ago, there was a lot of independent bottlings about. And that's just because historically, Tomatin was, in the 1970s, we were the biggest malt producer in the world. Even in the 1990s, we were much smaller, but we still represented 10% of all the malt whiskey produced in Scotland. So that's not a far cry. That's only 20 years prior to when I started at Tomatin. And
wow.
So a lot of that whiskey was produced to be traded with blenders. And what would inevitably happen would be sometimes there would be stock that survived and they would sell it on to brokers or on to independent bottlers. And you would see quite a lot of independent bottlings of Tomatin. And some really, really brilliant things. I remember trying I think it was like a 32-year-old Cadden Heads that just tasted of raspberry Kool-Aid. I was blown away by it. So there was some really, really incredible stuff. But something that we've tried to do, certainly since the 2000s, is try and control that a little bit more, because we want to get into the position where if you're picking up a bottle of Tomatin, it's got our kind of quality standards on it, So we'll still work with likes of Gordon MacPhail. We've got a great relationship with them, and maybe another couple of independent bottlers, but we certainly don't sell en masse. And even nowadays, the spirit that we do sell is not classed as Tomatin. It's got a trading name, a blending name, like so many brands do now. And that just gives us a layer of comfort in knowing that what is going out into the market with the name Tomatin on it is of a quality that we'll be happy with.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, there's a lot of that brand protection, isn't it? And making sure that people, because if somebody picks up a bad, I suppose the independent bottlers have that kind of idea as well. They don't look at a lot of people don't look at the distillery. They look at the name of the independent bottler. If they have a bad one, they don't go back to that independent bottler, even though they're doing 6 or 7 releases kind of a year or in a batch. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I'm not for a moment suggesting that any independent bottler out there strives to put out bad tomato whiskey. But I think, for all of these great and big independent bottlers that we're aware of, there are absolutely much smaller, whether it's even people that have maybe one or two casks that they just want to turn into cash.
Yeah.
So for us, being able to just have that trading name, meaning that when we swap our whiskey with blenders, that it will never go out as a tomato, and that's a good thing for us.
And is tomato still involved in the blending industry to a large?
Yeah, certainly not to the extent that it used to be. This year we'll be producing about 2.5 million litres. That's up on last year from 1.8 million. So like the rest of the industry at the moment, there is a bit of expansion there for us. Luckily, expansion just means working an extra couple of days a week for January and February. So the guys are just coming off of 24/7. Actually, yesterday would have been their last 24/7. So we're producing 2.5 million litres now. The vast majority of that is going to be put aside for our own malts. And then what's left will be traded with blenders so that we get the makes in that we require for our bottled blends and some of our bulk blends as well. But it's certainly not in the past we went out and we sold filling contracts. So we were almost like a contract distillery for these blenders where we were actively selling the blend, whereas now it's very much the reciprocal trading side of things.
Okay, yeah. And that trading kind of thing, that just to avoid any cash being transferred.
Very much so. Yeah. It's the way the blended whiskey industry was built over many years, and it's something that works well. And sometimes it's like for like. So sometimes we'll swap X amount of tomato and new make spirit for the exact same volume of another distillery's new make spirit. But it also happens when we're looking at older stocks. Every so often a producer might come along and say, "We've got 10 casks of 30-year-old tomatin. Would you like them back?" And we'll say, absolutely. But we've only, if you're looking for your make, we've only got 10-year-old, and we'll maybe have to swap them 50 casks to get those 10 casks back in. So it's making sure you're assigning the right value. And we've got a guy called Alistair Payton who works for us, and he handles all of that side of things. But a lot of the time it's almost like putting together the pieces of a puzzle, because there'll be 3-way, 4-way deals going on and things. It's quite incredible to see some of them getting pulled off. Sometimes sometimes you'll see a cask being offered and you think, we're never getting that back because of what they're looking for, but 9 times out of 10 he finds a way.
Yeah. And did you find that there's a cask going out and you're like, oh my god, I had great plans for that? And,
not so much, because whenever we're putting a cask out at that level, it will be another make, and it'll be something that was only ever going to be used in a blend. So
so they're always pretty early too.
Yeah, and for us, it's great to get the older tomatin back in. To get some of our own product back that we can release as a single malt is always a good thing.
Absolutely. So you fill the casks for tomatin single malt. At what stage do you kind of earmark that, saying, right, that's going into legacy, that's going into 12? How old does that cask be? And I guess that journey changes from time to time.
Yeah. So we know for our range of whiskies how many of each cask type we have to fill each year. So, for example, if we're filling a virgin oak cask with tomatin spirit, there's a 99% chance that will become legacy, because that's the only product that we have virgin oak casks for. Now, the 1% is the cask that we've got in our visitor centre, which is, let's try a fully matured and virgin oak. So there's that element that we will be filling casks, having an idea of what they're going to become. But, when they get to that 3-year-old mark, particularly when we're looking at maybe something like bourbon or sherry or refill casks, which could go in different directions, that's when we'll start to sample. And then, we'll say, right, that sherry cask's moving quite quickly. That's something that can go into our cask strength at about 8-9 years old. Or you can maybe find another one that's going a little bit slower, and you think that might be coming of age at about 12 years old. So it really is that kind of case-by-case basis, and going through the process of sampling, which, when you've got 77,000 casks of the stuff, it's... There we go.
Are you back? Was it me that went, or was it you?
I don't know. I think one of us went through a tunnel there. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, hopefully the guys at home heard the rest. I got to 77,000 casks, and then you covered it from
Yeah.
there.
So when you've got that many casks, it's a lot of sampling. But
Okay.
that's required, and it's particularly the case when we're getting to things that are going to start going into the 14-year-old or the 18-year-old, and you're playing about with stocks that maybe there's holes in the stock portfolio because of the business from 10, 15 years ago. And that's when you've really got to be clever about sometimes having to overage one element to overcome an underage somewhere else. So, yeah.
Okay. Willis is he's given up on the tequila. He wants to give you a hand in the whiskey sampling if needed. So,
Yeah.
so there you go. And Ian's also commented on YouTube saying that he wants a few bottles of the concept behind the cask within a cask idea if that ever comes to fruition.
Yeah. I mean,
what price to pay?
I think so. I don't know if it'll be a tomato bottle, but it's someone can run with it.
yeah, this mysterious malt.
Yeah.
I dare say that the SWA would have something to say about
that.
Straight
away. Yeah. But
and so I guess talking about casks and regulations, a certain Isla distillery came out tail end of last year with a Portuguese cask that was ridiculously big. And this whiskey had been in there for 2 years. It's a non-age statement anyway, but they couldn't call it 8 years old. It was matured for 8 years, but the last 2 of that were in this Portuguese cask.
Oh, interesting.
And
this cask was too big to be called a whiskey cask, right?
Yeah, it was. And I'm sure this figure seems crazy, but I'm sure 6,000 liters was mentioned.
That's not a cask anymore. That's a vat.
Yeah. Well, that was the whether that was the idea or whether they ticked the wrong box when they were ordering it and to see these 2 massive casks turn up. We're like, whoa, what we're going to do with this? But I guess it does happen, and so they still called it malt whiskey because I think it was, but they just couldn't include that maturation period in the age statement. But
yeah,
I think they got slapped on the wrist and told not to do it again. But
yeah, but at the same time, it's not really illegal. You know, we will take whiskey out of casks when we deem it to be ready, and say, for example, we have a product that has matured well, but it's not going to be released for another 6 months, but it's at its peak. We know we need to get it out of casks. We can take it out of casks, and depending on the size of the parcel, we can put it into a plastic IBC, or we can put it into a big metal vat. A big wooden tun is no different. The difference is if you are saying that during that period of time that it has continued to mature. And if they're saying, you know, it was 8 years old when it went in, it's only an 8-year-old whiskey, but it's rested for 2 years in a vat. From my understanding, there's nothing illegal in that. Where you would get into a little bit of bother would be if you called it a 10-year-old, because you're arguing then that final 2 years had maturation.
Okay.
I mean, a great example of this, it's actually, it comes on very nicely, is last year we released a Japanese single malt that just happens to be the rarest Japanese whiskey ever released.
Yes.
So the story very briefly is that our parent company, Takara Shutso, before they purchased Tomatin, owned a distillery in Japan called Shirakawa, and it produced whiskey from 1951 to 1969, and then from the 1970s onwards was involved in shochu production. It then closed down in 2003 and was demolished. And then in 2019, our managing director was part of a team that discovered the final parcel of stock from this distillery that had been distilled in 1958. Now, this is a distillery that never released single malt. It was only ever used in Japanese blended whiskey. So it's the only parcel of Shirakawa single malt in existence. And being from 1958, it is the youngest vintage of Japanese single malt ever released. There's not an earlier whiskey than that. So it's this incredibly rare thing, and the story is so much more layered and complex than that.
Yeah.
But the story of the whiskey is amazing. We know so much about how it was produced. Japanese malted barley, Mizunara oak casks, very, very squat still, so quite a heavy spirit. The maturation is where things, we know it went into these Mizunara oak casks, but then the story kind of goes awry because at some point in time, the liquid was taken out of those casks and it was moved first into ceramic pots. And then eventually it was moved from those ceramic pots into a stainless steel vat where it left. And if that hadn't happened, say, for example, this whiskey had stayed in casks all that time, it would have totally evaporated. It would have been gone.
Yeah.
So the fact that it was moved is why it survives. And I've been fortunate enough to taste it on several occasions. One of easily the best whiskies I have ever tried.
Really? Okay.
And the only thing I can suggest is that somebody at Shirakawa at some point in time had the same reaction to that whiskey as I did and thought, it's time to get it out of the cask. And they decided to stop the maturation. Now, we've had analysis done by several institutes, and they're putting it into the decades. It's been in the cask for a long period of time. We're just not able to say when. But that's exactly what we're talking about here. The difference is we've not put an age statement on this product. We've called it the Shirakawa 1958. I know from nosing it and tasting it, it's been matured for a very, very long time. The first time I tried it, it reminded me of things like tomatin in its 40s. It had that earthy, dirty, rancio element.
Yeah.
But technically, that's been in a vat for a period of time.
Yeah.
So it's not too different.
And it was just that maturation kind of terminology, how you put it out and how you word it. I guess some guys have been commenting. So Stuart saying he intentionally doesn't use the word mature. After the Blether with Stuart, I can see why he doesn't use the word mature. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when it continued to develop in the vat, I guess that just depends on the wood or how the vat is constructed. If there is any, it would certainly marry together. There would be a marriage there of flavors, I guess.
That's right. I mean, that's an interesting point though, because the word maturation, we think of maturation when we think of casks. We think of the time spent in casks. But maturation, from a technical point of view, is the sum of all physical and chemical changes that happens to a liquid once it's been produced. So say, for example, you distill on a Monday morning and that spirit stays in a vat until the end of the week when you fill your casks. Mm-hmm. There's subtle changes happening to that spirit. There's going to be sulfur blowing off. There's going to be other things going on. That cask that liquid has never been in a cask. Maturation's taking place because there is chemical changes happening. So I think, maturation, we often think about it as whiskey as the time in the cask, but there's so much more to it than that.
That's really interesting. So in terms of an age statement, that age statement has to signify time in the cask, doesn't it?
Right, yeah. So
you can't have that in a steel vat for the first 10 years, put it in a cask for 6 months and say, hey, this is 10 years old.
Exactly. You could leave new mixed spirit I don't know why you would do it, but you could leave it in a vat for 10 years, do nothing with it, and you still don't have whiskey. And then you would put it into a cask for 3 years and you maybe have a 3-year-old malt then.
You're not going to have a 13-year-old.
No, but you're going to have something that has gone through an incredible amount of chemical changes over 10 years of just resting, particularly if you've got a hatch open and allowing air to get in that would totally change it. You would still experience evaporation and things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Because I know from kind of producing gin that we leave the gin in a plastic container for about 6 weeks minimum before it bottles. And that is just to let the flavors marry together and let it settle. And you can really taste it, off the still to just that 6-week period. So I can imagine that whiskey would go through very, very similar, like you say, chemical changes on that. I suppose the kind of flip side is, what if they had put the whiskey into these vats? I suppose you've just it wouldn't be maturation until. So if they'd put it into these vats first and then decanted that into smaller casks.
Yeah.
It's just the same, but reverse. And they wouldn't be able to count that 2 years in the vat. It would only be the casks.
No, that's right. But it's an interesting thing, the idea of using vats that were previously used in other industries. If you think of a great example of a great use of a vat is the Solera vat from Glenfiddich. Is it their 15-year-old?
Yeah,
That's a similar thing where the whiskey has been moved into a vessel that is bigger than a cask, and they use it for fractional blending, like the sherry producers use in Spain. And that allows them an opportunity to create new flavor because you're adding new spirit into older spirits and then bottling it. The thing there is every drop of liquid that goes into that vat is 15 years old, so they then bottle it as a 15-year-old. So I think there's a lot of ways to play about with vats and explore them. That infinity vat type of concept is always interesting.
Yeah, because you'll have whiskey in there that's been resting, I suppose. We can't use mature, but in there for a long, long time.
Yeah, and if we accept that, one of my pet peeves is if I ever go on a tour and someone says we've been making it the same way for the past 200 years. Well, it's a load of nonsense because barley varieties, yeast strains, they've all changed. The only thing that is the same is probably your water source. So
and even then, it's probably only used for the cooling tower now rather than the actual whiskey.
Yeah. So if you go and then you take that Solera vat idea and say you've got spirit in there that started life 20 years ago, well, that's going to be from a different barley strain, from a different yeast strain, from a different stillman, from a different mashman. So there will be subtle differences in that spirit to what you're adding to it. So it's almost like an archive, a liquid time capsule type of thing.
Yeah, I've always kind of thought of the distillation as the sciencey bit. It's all measured in kind of temperatures and volumes, and then going at the cask is the magic. But there's so much in that pre-maturation that is vitally important, the wee tweaks and things, and that's changing all the time now as well. A lot of these new guys are looking more at that, and I guess that is to create a spirit going into the cask that they don't have to wait that 10 years for.
There is that. Yeah.
These Ardent Americans, these Rasses, they're looking at ways of getting a spirit, maybe longer fermentation, a different yeast, a different barley strain, so that they've got ready liquid. It's good enough to drink.
I look at it in a very similar way. I say it's whiskies where science meets art, and it's production and then it's maturation. But the other thing that I always like to say is there's about 150 distilleries in Scotland producing single malt whiskey right now, and we all have the same 3 ingredients in the same 5 or 6 processes. Mm-hmm. So it's the decisions that are made in your spirit creation, in your ingredient selection, in your timings, and in the way you run your equipment that are going to give you your new mixed spirit. And those are the processes that will give you a spirit that is different from the other 149 distilleries in Scotland. Your maturation is what allows you to take that spirit and create your own range of products. So when I look at the Tomatin range, for example, the new mixed spirit, because of the distillation, because of that science, because of the decisions that have been made over the last 125 years, we've got to the point where that is its own identifiable spirit, which is unmistakably Tomatin. Mm-hmm. But then you look at our range, and even in our core range, which has Legacy 12, Cask Strength 14 and 18-year-old, they all taste totally different. There's a common thread. There's that fruit-forward, malty backbone of Tomatin, but the way the casks are used gives us totally different products. So it's almost what is each part of that process doing for you?
Yeah, it's you often we go on so many tangents in the on the Blethers. Just talking about one brand or one distillery, there's so many tangents you can go on. And like I say, it's quite often on a tour you see these process is very matter of fact. Kind of, this is the temperature, this is the volume, this is the timings, this is what still looks like. And then they kind of, when they get into the tasting, they say, and this is the cask, and this is where we get the color and the flavor and that. I don't think enough credit is given pre-maturation for pre-cask.
100%. And I know that Chris Coates from Whisky Magazine kind of dug into that a little bit more, and he made a really fascinating point. He was saying, if we're saying as distillers that 70% of the flavor comes from maturation, which is something that it just doesn't make sense, because how can a refill cask for 3 years have the same impact as a virgin oak cask for 10 years? It's just, but if we're giving so much, we're giving so much credit away, because Scotch whiskey's always relied on casks from second hand, So if we're giving 70% of the flavor credibility to the rest of the world that supplied us with these casks, we're almost taking no credit for the incredible job that is done in picking your barley, deciding what strain you're going to use. Are you going to peat it? Are you not going to peat it? Are you going to do something wacky by putting heather in there? You're taking away the importance of your water source. You're taking away the yeast choice and the length of fermentation. You're taking away all these really, really incredible points. And if you go around any distillery, each of the guys within the distillery will tell you how important their role is to the product, and they're all absolutely correct.
I was going to say, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the stillman, he'll say something different to the guy working the mash tun, to the guy, the cooper. I suppose if we look at grain distillation, as another example, we've got, is it 5, 6 distilleries that's still in Scotland?
I think there is more now, because you've got things like if you look at Arbiki, technically they're doing rye, it's a grain. So, but in terms of the mass scale ones, you're looking about, I think it's 5, maybe 6.
Yeah, and they're all producing vastly different spirit.
Yeah,
but the the point of them is to get almost neutral, but with their own little nuances. And I suppose that's if you're looking at industrial production, they go through a very similar process to each other, but still come out with this completely different grain spirit that reacts differently in a different cask and stuff. So
absolutely, and that's one of the things when it comes to blending. So I look after our blended whiskies as well. So things like Talisman all the way through to Antiquary, and particularly when you're looking at Antiquary, which has things like a 21-year-old in the range, it has 15-year-old limited editions. You're looking at the portfolio, and the type of grain that we have in each year can vary. So you find yourself one year thinking, right, we've got a lot of North British, which is brilliant news, because the founders of Antiquary were involved in the North British distillery. So there's a lovely little story there. But then you go 3 years along the line and it's all Cameron Bridge. So you've kind of got to overlay them in the same way that you would overlay different cask types, so that any changes that do take place are very subtle and they're minimized.
And it's something on such a commercial, industrial, mass-produced scale as grain whiskey can produce vast differences, then surely, credit is given to the guys who are doing it handcraft or very much small scale. So there's so much difference in the distillation of the spirit. Which is Ian Bruce has jumped on to his YouTube to ask a question. What is your most memorable moment in your whiskey journey?
Wow. There's so many. One that I always think upon fondly was, we were at a whiskey fair in Switzerland, in Lucerne, and Lucerne lies in the shadow of Mount Pilatus, which is one of the Alps. Now, myself and Juliet, I don't know if she's still on, but we've gone back and forth, because I think the single for Alps is Alp, but being from France, Juliet tells me that's not the case. But this day we decided, it was myself, it was Andy Bell from Arran Distillery, and Ronan from now Glenallachie. He was at Cadenheads at the time. And it was the morning of the show. The show wasn't going to start till the afternoon. And we decided to take the cable car up this mountain. And it was just an incredible experience. Just 3 pals about to go to work. We had a bottle of whiskey. We're cruising up this cable car up the side of an Alp. It was just one of those moments of this is a really, really cool thing to do. I would say the only thing that has rivaled that was when I first got to try that Shirakawa malt whiskey.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So I got a photo sent to me by our managing director. No, she didn't. We got a photo sent by our managing director, who was in Japan at the time, and it was just this small vial, golden liquid, Japanese characters on it, and it said 1958. And I said to him, what's that? And he said, and he kind of told the story, and it was just a jaw-dropping moment where, and every moment since, when we found out more about this distillery, just added on, and the only thing I can equate the significance to is like finding the cask of malt mill in the Angel Share, except it's a real story, and it happens to be a cask of this, a parcel of this lost Japanese whiskey. I've got to try it, and that moment where the liquid lived up to the story and the myth and the fable, and it was that to me is something. And then I was very lucky over the next 3 years to be working on that project, and the whole time I was working on that project, knowing that I will probably never work on anything quite as significant in the rest of my career, and being totally okay with it, because this was just it was amazing.
Yeah, it's almost like scoring a hat trick on your debut. You're like, well, how do you beat that?
Your debut just happens to be the World Cup final. Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Well, so that's I've seen the cask being advertised. Was it about this time last year, or was it maybe later on in the year?
The Shirakawa.
Yeah,
it came out in September. So it's only been available for a few months now, and really up until this point has really only been available in the UK. So now the stock is getting out into export as well. So the reaction to it has been amazing.
Yeah. I was going to give Keith a shout and see if he could send me a sample, but I guess that's out of the cards, is it?
It's hard to get a sample. Yeah, it is very difficult.
Yeah, unless you're in the trade, you hit the jackpot there. Julia is still here. She didn't come up with you, but I'm intrigued now to know what the plural, the singular of Alps is.
Yeah, I stand by it being Alp.
It's got to be an Alp.
An Alp.
Yeah, lay Alp. Yeah,
lay Alp. Yeah.
So,
surely, yeah. Fluid.
I don't know what else it could be. I suppose no, yeah, okay. So I would go on now thinking about it. The Cairngorms, one mountain in the Cairngorms isn't called the Cairngorm. Well, one is, but
one is,
one is, but the rest aren't. Terrible example.
That is. Oh, Juliet agrees as well. So, yeah, one Alp, fantastic.
So one Alp is
yeah.
But I guess they all have their own names as well within that. Mont Blanc and
so this was Pilatus, and it was just incredible. The cool thing about it was there was a bar halfway up, so we got halfway up and we had a beer and we had a little bit of food, and then we went the rest of the way, and it was amazing, a really amazing experience. And I think the great thing is, in answering Ian's question, is that's one of many memories and moments like that. And I think what's really cool about it is I don't know if I could tell you what whiskey we were drinking that day. Yeah, but it was brilliant. If I went out on a limb, I would say it was the old Aaron Bothy that they used to have. I think Andy took a bottle of that up, but it was not about that. It was about just this cool experience that happened to have whiskey with it. And that's something that I'm always keen to get across when we're doing these nosings and tastings, is to tell people, for this tasting, I'm here to help you unpick these whiskies, but it's important to remember that you don't have to do this. Some of my favorite memories involve being around a campfire with some friends, and if I was to say I'm getting subtle hints of anything, I'd be getting a subtle slap around the head and told to stop looking. So.
Yeah, it's one thing I've learned as I've developed in whiskey and from doing tasting events, especially for larger groups. Say we go to a golf club or a fundraiser for charity or something, and there's maybe 30 people, 50 people in the room. I used to get really annoyed when I was explaining the whiskey and this noise just kind of built up around you of people going off in tangents in their own little groups. And I was like, I'm here, I'm talking, listen, shut up. Talk. And so I've kind of learned that it's, and kind of looking at it from my perspective or the customer's perspective is, and I now use this as an introduction, is I'll talk about the whiskey until you guys are ready to talk to yourselves, because when it comes to drinking whiskey, you're drinking it in a bar with the guys who are around you at the table. You're not drinking it with me. So,
Yeah.
kind of my opinion means very little. What you guys need to do is find, talk to each other about it, because you're the guys who are sitting in the bar, sitting at home with each other. You're the friends. So, and it's just kind of, it doesn't matter to me whether you like it or not. This is the whiskey we've got. Talk to each other and tell each other whether you like it. And as soon as I kind of realized that, I kind of accepted that, it makes these tastings so much less stressful, because you're not trying to tell them everything. It's just like, if the guys who want to listen.
I would far rather people leave a tasting that I've done saying, that tomato tasting we were at was excellent. Can't remember the individual drams, but had a great night, than people leaving saying, I remember each of the whiskies and all of the tasting notes, but had a terrible time.
Yeah.
For me, it goes back to what are we selling? We're selling alcohol. Alcohol's all about enjoyment. It's always held a role as that social lubricant that's going to allow people to engage on a deeper basis. And if you can just happen to do that with an incredible product, and absolutely, there are so many things that deserve that appreciation and that moment of time to sit with a nosing glass and things like that. But there's also a lot of great whiskey out there that is designed for when friends come round, the cork goes in the fire, and you just really enjoy that bottle together.
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose it's our role as kind of ambassadors for whiskey to draw that line and say, okay, you've learned the basics, just enjoy it, and whether you enjoy listening to me or not. I mean, we've got guys on tonight who hopefully enjoy listening to us, rabble on every week, and hopefully they're enjoying having a whiskey and sometimes discovering new things. But I think that has to be experience. It has to be relaxed. It has to be fun for people to enjoy it. If you're too regimented about drinking your whiskey, then you lose that, don't you? You lose that kind of personal enjoyment, and you'll have had it probably not too many times, I hope. But you'll have people saying, "Oh, I don't like tomato and whiskey at a taste," and it's like, well, that's okay, but have you had fun? And well, yeah, it was a good laugh. It was good. Didn't like whiskey, but what a great night. And that's probably, as long as you enjoy the experience.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing better than when you can get together with a group of people that all have the same level of appreciation and understanding, and they will go through that process of the conversation is about that whiskey, and there is that community is existing and it's growing and it's flourishing and it's brilliant. But it's also great to be able to introduce pals to whiskey that maybe wouldn't otherwise have gravitated towards whiskey, because it's something that they're having with a buddy, and that's always good as well. So yeah.
We've had we're going back to Alps for just a second. Tobias said in German, the plural is Alpen, and that's my mind blown. I did not know that the muesli cereal was named after
multiple Alp.
Yeah, multiple Alp. So one Alp is an Alpe, and plural is Alpen. So there we go. It works in various languages as
Excellent.
well.
And I thought I was wrong all this time.
Chris Brown, one of his best whiskey memories, on a bus with his pipe band, going to a competition and sharing a bottle of grouse. Yeah, we just kind of said that the whiskey itself doesn't matter.
Yeah. I wonder what type of nosing glass they were using on that bus journey.
They all had their own little capita. Yeah. Everyone was supplied with a little glass to smell it. I wonder. So the best whiskey memory was going to the competition, Chris. I'm guessing that you didn't win the competition. Otherwise, I would have said the best one was the celebratory dram on the way home.
It maybe was, but it's not so much of a memory anymore.
More of a fuzz, a haze in the plastic tumblers.
Yeah. Some of the best whiskies are plastic tumblers.
Yeah, well, let's say after a walk in the woods and you're at the campfire after, or these little stainless steel cups, and it's absolutely.
No, there's
so guys, if any of you guys have still got questions, please feel free to fire fire them through. That is us hitting an hour. I'm happy to stick around for a wee bit longer if you are, Scott. The last couple of I was going to say tastings. The last couple of chats have gone for considerable. Stuart broke a record. Stuart Dick a couple of weeks ago broke a record. I think it was 3 hours and 15 minutes or something like that. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. That sounds like a lot of the tours that he used to do at Tomatin as well. He's meant to be out there for 45 minutes.
But I mean, Mossberg are doing some really interesting, some really good stuff. Is there any kind of companies coming up that you're really excited about, that you're keen to kind of get to know better?
Yeah, I mean, there's always things on the radar. I would say for me, that we were saying before we came on that just on the 30th of December there, we had our second baby. So I've not been out and about on the road this year so much. Last year was crazy. You know, the last time we spoke on here, Mike, was back in 2021, September 2021, when we were still when I still had a StreamYard subscription, you know. And then over 2022, that was our 125th anniversary. So there was a lot of travel, there was a lot of new releases, and I got to spend a lot of time out on the road. And you know, some of the companies I'm really interested in are companies that nobody in the UK would have heard of. So I spent a little bit of time in Texas and got to go and visit Still Austin Distillery and speak to the guys there. And I mean, just the quality of whiskey coming out of distilleries like that. I'm a huge bourbon fan as well. So that really excited me. A bit closer to home, really excited to see what happens with Uli Beast in Inverness. You know, the first distillery in 130 years. I walked past it the other day. So, you know, it's great to see things like that coming to fruition and see where they go. There's plenty of distilleries that are now releasing their own product since we really spoke. You know, I mean, I don't think when we spoke last that Rasse had really released anything. And now you see the guys on quite a lot. And you've got likes of Isle of Harris, who have been doing great gin for so long. They're about to release their whiskey. So always keeping my eye out on new companies. At the same time, there's distilleries that have been around for 150, 200 years that are doing exciting things that they've maybe never done before. And that's always exciting as well. What about you? You're in the shop and you're seeing a lot of new products coming in. What's exciting you?
I think all of we mentioned Rasse there. They've done some really great stuff. And I'm not just saying this because he's watching, but Torvig have got and I'm really excited about their journeyman expressions for them to become available. I think that's something I've not heard of, what they're doing there. I don't know if you're aware of what they're allowing. So everyone in the distillation team, or I think everyone across the production team, are given the opportunity to make their own spirit. No kind of barriers, obviously within the legal terms, but they get to choose their barley, they get to choose the peat level, the fermentation time, the distillation, the cut, what kind of casks. So this whole journey, and I think two of them get to do it every year, and then it's matured on the island in their own warehouse. So I'm really excited to that, because that's one distillery doing a host of different kind of experimental stuff that probably going back to the start of the conversation tonight when we're chatting about all these great fun experiments going on there. And so that's really exciting. And it's one, and I apologize to Stuart last time we were talking about it. It's one that I always overlook when we talk about new distilleries. I just feel that it's been around for a long time. It's just got that kind of style to it, that look, that feel, that experience about it that I keep forgetting it's new. So Torvig are doing some good stuff. Matthew there from Canary Head Whiskies talk about LBD. I'm really excited with the Little Brown Dog. I'm really excited about independent bottlers.
Couldn't agree more on Little Brown Dog. Just knocking it out the park with everything.
It's brilliant. They do pick some great casts. It's their videos. It's their whole ethos is just bonkers. And it's brilliant. They've got everyone on a fish hook, and but the best thing about it is they're delivering.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I also saw, different but of a similar ilk. Leith Distillery just released Perpetuity, which is like an infinity cask blend type of thing. And
Okay.
again, just taking likes of the guys at Woven down in Edinburgh as well,
Yeah.
taking that more modern approach to whiskey across the board. It's something that we try and do as a single malt with Cu Bocan. It's something that the guys at LBD do very well in the way they present whiskies and the way they introduce people to it, and likes of Leith and Woven in the way they blend whiskies. I love seeing that as well.
I remember I was on the advanced whiskey ambassadors course last year with Joe and Bob went in, and we went to Holyrood Distillery
Right.
for the tour, and the guide was great. He was just so relaxed, young lad, probably about half my age, taking us around the distillery. And one of the German guys on the tour asked him, "So what are your cut points? What are you looking for?" And he's like, we kind of just mix it up and we kind of go with the flow and we see what we want to do." And you could just see, we all know how regimental the Germans could be. To like their facts, to like their figures, to like organization. And you can just see he just could not get a grip of this idea that they'd just been given almost free reign.
Yeah.
It
It's a funny thing though, and it's so true. Like a distillery like Tomatin, we pride ourselves on consistency. I was speaking to Graham, our master distiller, just last week, and this conversation came up about how there's some distilleries out there that actively strive for a certain flavor type. Maybe they need it for a wider blend, and they research how they can make their whiskey, whether it's more fruity or more meaty, and what they can do, and they're always striving towards that. For us, it's accepting that the Tomatin flavour is the Tomatin flavour because of everything that we've done, but we need to make it consistent because we need to have that for the size of range and brand that we have. But at the same time, absolutely, if you've got a distillery like Holyrood, why do you have to be consistent? When whiskey was made 500 years ago, it wasn't consistent. This idea of consistency is a relatively new thing in the overall story of spirits production. So it's cool to hear that happening as well.
Yeah. I think consistency kind of comes from grains, doesn't it? For making the blends, and I guess that was the start of it, wasn't it? When malt became a thing, it was like, well, let's make our malt consistent because we don't need the backup of these grains to come in and do that. Yeah. Ian is knocking the questions out of the park tonight. He's asking if you could pick one country to launch a new distillery, where would you go? I'm going to say you can't do Scotland.
No,
that would be cheating.
Italy. It is my favorite country in the world. I've said for the last 5 years that before I leave this world, I will live in Florence. So I would absolutely just take over the Duomo, just have a couple of stills in the back of that and we'll be good to go.
I'm sure they'll let you in there.
In the world as well.
Planning permission wouldn't be a problem getting in that.
No, it would be fine.
So there you go. Italy it's not. I've never heard of. There's a lot of new kind of countries coming up with whiskey. I'm not aware of any in Italy. I don't know if
There's
you know.
Puni Distillery in Italy. I've not actually tried any of their whiskey yet, but the incredible thing about Italy is it's one of the most amazing single malt markets in the world. It's I think it's maybe one of only 2 markets in the world where single malt outsells blend by volume. At one point in time, it was the biggest whiskey market in the world. It's an incredible fascination that Italians have with
it's Glen Grant, isn't it? Glen Grant, it's massive there. And it's young as well. So it's a young whiskey.
5-year-old Glen Grant was the whole market was built on it. But then you go over there now, and some of the most extraordinary whiskey collections I have ever seen are in Italian hands, and they're just so open and willing to show you. I mean, they're not going to open bottles, but they'll certainly show you the collection, and it's incredible stuff.
It's surprising that I knew about the Glen Grant and the young malts, but I didn't realize it was quite as big as in the collection side.
Yeah, no, massive, absolutely massive. It's amazing.
Stuart's asking how last year's experimental run go with the caramel.
Yeah, so on that side, so I guess to take a step back, what we do is every year when we are about to shut down for Christmas, that's when we will produce the Cu Bocan spirit. So we change the barley, we change the production regime. But what we've started doing over the last couple of years is before our summer shutdown, we will do a barley trial with it being a tomatin spirit. So the first one that we did was chocolate malt, and then last year we did caramel. And there's nothing groundbreaking with these. Other distilleries have done chocolate malt, other distilleries have done caramel, but it's new for us. And I would say the best way to talk about the caramel is in comparison to the chocolate malt. So with the chocolate malt, we were added so many new flavors were added to the spirit. So you had that deep espresso. When you walked through the distillery, it smelled like a coffee roasters. It was incredible. And it added all these incredible flavors. Whereas the caramel has really just ramped up that malty backbone that is in the tomatin spirit anyway. So the tomatin new make spirit that we normally look for has this lovely sweet malted barley backbone, and then these apples and pears and rhubarb fruits on top of it. The caramel has really ramped up that barley flavor. So it's a much more cereal-led spirit that we've got off the back of it. And much like the chocolate malt, we've filled it into second fill casks. So second fill bourbon, second fill sherry, second fill muscatel. And that's going to allow the spirit to be the dominant thing there. And at about 3-4 years old, we'll start to look at, do we want to have this as that kind of refill cask type of thing, or is there casks that we can add that are going to bring out more of the flavor there? So with the dark chocolatey espresso notes of the chocolate malt, maybe a red wine cask would add layers there that would be beneficial. With the caramel, I see virgin oak working very well. That kind of big pecan-y notes that you get from virgin oak.
Nice. So there you go. We just talked about how you guys have been striving recently for consistency in that, and now you're going off on a wee tangent with something completely different, which is excellent. And so these guys will maybe come out as a range, something like your French collection or something that's
very possibly
under tomatin, but
so it would definitely be under tomatin. And it really is just, over the last 10 years anyway, the tomatin brand's really done great things on the cask side of things. And, the range of limited releases that we've had, the French collection, the Portuguese collection, Five Virtues, Quattro, they've all leaned on maturation. And don't get me wrong, there's still so much line and cask that over the next few years will give us so many new things. But we did start to think, what are whiskey drinkers going to be really looking for in 10 years' time? And that's when we started to think we can play about with the spirit and still have it as a tomatin spirit, just not the tomatin spirit.
Yeah, it's incredible when you think, I don't know what I'm doing this time next week. Well, I do. We've got the whiskey cannery, but in general, I don't know what I'm doing next week. And we've got guys like yourselves, guys like your team, predict in 10 years how much do we need? What are the trends going to be? What are the casks we can look at? It's incredible stuff.
We often talk about it as spinning plates while looking into a crystal ball.
Yeah. And one thing I've kind of picked up from David's book, that Independent Scotch, was that this had a kind of, these predictions had a big influence on independent bottling, and they would predict, but they would also over predict on the base that they would have. So it's far easier to sell mature spirit than it is to try and recoup that. So that's where that independent bottling kind of got the cask from. It wasn't because it was poor cask. It wasn't that the guys didn't want it. They deliberately overproduced on the chance that there was maybe a boom or.
I mean, you look at the story of Tomatin, 1974, largest malt whiskey distillery in the world. 1984, it's in liquidation. And the reason for that was the industry as a whole produced far too much spirit in the 1970s. The market didn't want it, and that's really when we started in the 1990s to get older bottles of whiskey. The whiskey that was sold in the 1970s and 80s was generally 5 years old. Glen Grant, 5 years old to Italy. Very, very good. It was only when, nobody sold anything in the second half of the 80s and the early half of the 90s that you sit there in 1995 and think, we've got an 18-year-old single malt now. This is an incredible thing.
Yeah.
And that's where distilleries like Tomatin, in the 1990s, Tomatin launched its 12-year-old in 1997. And that was the oldest product in the range. It was the flagship of the range. And now it's our biggest selling malt worldwide. And we release 50-year-old expressions and 45-year-olds. So the industry is forever changing. And I think a lot of the things that we get to enjoy now are because the forecasts were wrong in the past. And that's quite a difficult thing to accept as a blender who is trying to forecast what's going to happen. But also being a whiskey geek on the other hand, it's like, do we intentionally get it wrong?
I suppose there's always boom and bust. It's how you learn from the last bust that makes you elongate the next boom, I suppose. Well, one thing I do love about Tomatin is the diversity, and you're always involved with the Belladrum Tartan Heart Festival and the cocktails. Do you think that's certainly here to stay? That's going to be a new wave of whiskey not just whiskey cocktails, but premium whiskey cocktails where malt is more used in the cocktails, because there is still that kind of underlying thinking that if you're making a cocktail, just put in the blend or put in the cheap stuff.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it's here to stay, and I think it is. I think the way that the whiskey market has gone in the last 10 years suggests that it would, because people have moved towards quality over quantity, and they have moved towards a position of being willing to spend more for better. And they do that on bottles of single malt regularly. And certainly when I speak to bartenders, that's the theme that they're seeing as well. You know, being given the freedom by the consumer to create with the best ingredients possible. And I've always likened what bartenders do to what chefs do. You know, if you go to a Michelin star restaurant, the chef is using the best ingredients that have been hand sourced and hand selected, and they've used them in incredible ways. But you can also get a good burger from McDonald's every so often, you know?
Yeah.
So sometimes a whiskey and Coke is okay. But 9 times out of 10, if I'm looking to have a whiskey cocktail, I love going to a bar that takes a malt whiskey where the bartender is a whiskey fan and understands the flavor, and then looks at all of the other things that he's got on his bar and how can we create something. One of my favorite experiences of that was actually in Russia a few years back, not recently, but one of my favorite market visits I ever did was to Russia. And we went to the speakeasy, and then the people in the speakeasy, when they found out that we worked in the industry, sent us to another speakeasy that was only for people that worked in the bar industry. So this was cocktails for cocktail makers. And I happened to have a bottle of New Mix Spirit with me. And I gave the bottle of New Mix Spirit to the bartender. We'd been talking for a while, and he had come back and created his own cocktail out of our New Mix Spirit. And that was an incredible thing to see. So I think there's a lot that can be done there. Yeah. And Italy's another great example of a country that has one of the most amazing cocktail whiskey bar scenes on the go at the moment as well. And you'll find things like Tomatin Legacy are the house pour. You know, it's the well drink is a Tomatin Legacy. If that's the case, you're starting from a very, very good, strong starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. And yeah, so did that Russian you make cocktail taste good? Was it all right?
It was amazing. It was. I don't remember all the ingredients. You certainly can't get the Tomatin New Make Spirit, but I know that there was Tomatin New Make, there was absinthe, and there was like a strawberry liqueur in there. All of the other stuff was in Russian, so I'm not entirely sure what it was, but it truly was amazing. The hangover the next day was maybe one of the top 5 hangovers I've ever had. It was awful. I would say, yeah, I don't think I could do it now, but 5 years ago, worth it.
Absolutely. And you'll know Graham Mackay from Adelphi, and I noticed he was celebrating the anniversary of his stag do the other day, and there's just this picture of him having to sell or pour like 100 cocktails or something at an event the next day.
Amazing.
And his face was just the biggest. Where else could I be?
I've seen that face of Graham Mackay at every whiskey festival across Europe on the Sunday session.
Oh dear. Well, he's coming up at the end of next month for a tasting with us with the Delphi and Ireland American. So I will pass on that nugget of information that's not an uncommon, uncommon look from. Yeah.
There's more than one of that photo in existence for sure.
It was his stag day. I'm pretty sure it was after his stag day.
It was, yeah, after a week in Budapest or something like that.
Yeah. The last time we chatted, Scott, we mentioned how much of a sherry head you were as well, and not the sherry cask, but the actual sherry itself. Is there anything you've come out from that industry that you've picked up on recently that is pretty exciting?
Do you know that, again, there hasn't been too much that I've just, over the last year, sadly, not really been able to keep up too much with it because there's been so much going on our side. Last year is the busiest year I've ever known. And I think during COVID, I got to really enjoy sherry because I was at home and I would be able to order bottles and things. So no, I definitely need to get back into that. Last year, because we launched the Portuguese collection, I was able to spend a little bit of time in Portugal and learn more about port and Moscatel. And so maybe the time that I would have normally allocated to sherry last year went to Portugal. And I'm not sorry about that at all. It was fascinating to learn about that industry more. And now Porto is right at the top of my holiday list. I'm absolutely going to go back and spend a little bit more time. The train ride from Porto into the Douro Valley, stunning, absolutely stunning. So no, I got to find a passion for port and tequila over the last year. But yeah, maybe to the detriment of sherry a little bit. I need to get back with the guys that we go to Jerez with, and we've been talking for about a year now of getting together. I know Graham's got a bottle of Fino sherry that has been produced with the PX grape by Jimenez Spinola, waiting for this meeting. So and that is Graham Mackay, oddly enough, not Graham Munson. So we'll get together and try that at some point.
Excellent. Good stuff. Well, I hope that comes around very soon.
Me too. There's been several babies getting in the way of it.
I know. Ian just had one as well, didn't he?
Baby as well. So
yeah, there's. I mean, the kids don't ruin all the fun, though, do they? Surely not.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks very much.
Great. You'll love it. You'll absolutely love it.
Yeah. We won't get to do anything, but we'll have fun along the way.
Yeah. As you said, it's just like having a dog. 100%.
Just like, yeah. I kid you not, I had a dream the other night that we had the baby and I was teaching it how to sit and do paw. That was in my dream. It was like, so there we go. Maybe it's a side of
I had a dream that I had a dog that I was teaching how to talk.
There we go. So just getting a update notification on my laptop now. Plug it in. Hopefully it's not going to be one of these automated things.
Yeah, Juliet's got some knowledge for you there.
Kids are great after 20 years. Yeah, we had our first antenatal class in person, so we'll be doing them online. And then Monday we were at the our first in-person one, and so they're asking if there's any questions, and I was like, yeah, have you got any advice for years 0 to 18, because you're giving us all this great advice pre-birth, but nobody's giving us any advice afterwards. They didn't have that. They after the first kind of 6 months, I think you're left to wing it. And
then 4 years later, you get the nursery getting in contact because your son's been swearing and singing "Rolling" by Limp Bizkit. So that's a fun experience.
Yeah, he's just expressing himself. It's fine.
Yeah, it's art. It's art.
Yeah. So Chris from Little Brown Dog as well. He's in my antenatal class. They're expecting as well, which was great because it meant I wasn't the oldest expecting dad there,
or the drunkest.
No, but we're both quite sober that day. Yeah. It was Monday.
Yeah, it will be a sobering experience.
I know. So I'm looking forward to year 20 then, Juliet. That could be that's my aim to get there.
Yeah,
could be good fun. Well, Scott, thanks very much for
problem.
joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. Great fun.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we didn't get I didn't get to raise a glass, but there's more to life than drinking whiskey.
Yeah, and in a couple of weeks' time, you'll be raising one for a much better.
I haven't chosen my bottle, my celebrated bottle. I'll have to look at a few, and we'll maybe do a wee poll in here when he comes. The Blether afterwards, we'll open up one. Guys, for watching, we don't have anything on next week because me, Russell, and Kat are all involved with the Whisky Academy. So we won't be doing a Blether next week, but we'll be in touch with the week after. Russell keeps the diary on that one, so we don't know. I don't know who we've got actually. I'll have to catch up with Russell when he's feeling better and see who we've got. But we will announce it in due course. Dave on YouTube, I will absolutely take that. It's a bit late now anyway. That advice, he says, don't read too many books about babies.
You'll be much better reading about independent bottlers, 100%.
and that's so. I put a post up on after that antenatal class. Actually, they were like, "Yeah, he's at the stage now. He recognizes your voice, and so you should read him stories, read the books, sing to him." So I put a wee post of me reading the story of Compass Box and John Glacier to him. So that didn't go down too well, but
yeah, a little bit Alfred Bernard before bedtime.
yeah. He's got to start somewhere.
Yeah,
excellent. Scott, thanks very much again.
Thanks,
it's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we'll get a dram soon. We'll have to get you back over to do another tasting
100%
in the shop in the next year or so. Yeah,
excellent.
Perfect. Thanks very much, guys. Thanks very much for joining us on YouTube or Facebook. If you're joining in late, please feel free to jump back to the start and watch again. If you've got any questions throughout the night, please do pop them in the chat. We always follow up and have a wee look and see. And Scott, if you're happy, if I can't answer, I'll ping you over 100%. Any questions that come through, and we'll get those answers to you. Alistair's away off to the virtual pub now, and so they'll be on. Is it 8 o'clock they start, isn't it?
9:45, I think.
Oh, is it? Oh.
Unless it's changed, but it used to be 9:45. But I might see you there, Alistair.
I have a wee look in every now and then after a Blether, but the Blether is normally a bit more alcohol than I had tonight, and it goes on with the guys like Stuart keeping us on for over 3 hours.
Yeah.
But thanks very much, Scott, again. And again, guys at home, thanks very much. It's always a pleasure to hopefully entertain you over the course of the evening. So I will say good night now, and we'll see you all again very soon.
Cheers, guys. Night.